Okay, let's do this. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name's Michael Markowsky, and today we are going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists. Today we're going to be looking at Franz Marc, and Franz Marc was one of the great avant-garde painters of the early 20th century, and he had he lived a little bit longer, he would certainly be more well known than he already is within sort of a portion of the art world, especially in his native Germany. He is one of the great artists of the 20th century, but elsewhere maybe a little bit less so. So let's dive into this great artist's artwork and celebrate this beautiful painting. Today is one of our beginner focused artworks, so we're going to try to do this painting in about the most simple way that I can possibly imagine. We're going to be using a technique called dry brush to get some of this painting done, and probably very limited to little mediums or other fluids that we're going to put in here. So it should be relatively straightforward for most people. I'm super excited to do this painting, so let's jump right into it. I want to show you the plan of attack here. We're going to start by just getting the image onto the canvas. We're going to talk about a different one. You can just sketch it on, but I'll show you how to transfer it using a template that I've created that's free. All of this is free. We're also going to we're going to prep the canvas with the first layer of paint. That's what Imprimatura means. Then we're going to take a look at Franz Marc's biography while that canvas is drying. Then we're going to start, I wonder if we'll do an underpainting. We may not. Well, let me see. We'll think about it. And then we're going to kind of go back and forth between the foreground and background, bounce around a few times until we get to our finishing touches, and then our side-by-side comparison in about an hour and 45 minutes from now. So we should be wrapped up within a good 2 hours, which is a good enough time to get a lot of artwork accomplished in a short period of time. Maybe just a real quick mention, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you know when bonus episodes are happening. I tend to do a lot of those, and I strongly encourage that. And then I also want to encourage you to join our private Facebook group. There's a link in the description below, and upload the painting you make to the group so that we can all see and celebrate your work. And this weekend, there's going to be a special episode where I gather everything together and we take a look at them and I give people feedback. This will be the 17th time I've done that, and people tend to really enjoy that. So why don't you participate in that? Okay, so let's talk about getting an image onto the canvas, the image transfer. So I'm going to show you here in a second. There's a Dropbox folder that not only contains this image, which you can download, the original, but also a template that I've created. I drew this out on my iPad Pro using the Procreate app, right? So I just traced it all out, and you can download it from the Dropbox. So I'll show you where the Dropbox folder is. Here. So this, if you click on the link, this is what you're going to see when you open up the Dropbox folder. There is, I think, 141 folders in here. About 130 of them actually have images. Some of them are still, I'm waiting to populate them so that people don't get too far ahead of the class. So here, if we click in, at the very top of this folder are all of our easiest artworks, including the beginner's course. These are all the files related to that. So today is, one of our most simple paintings. If we click inside here, you're going to see these images. Now there's actually another painting inside here that you could do as well. This is another very famous painting. This is in the Guggenheim collection, the Yellow Cow, done at a very, at the same period of time, right before World War I. And of course there is also the outline for that. So you can download the PDF or JPEG versions of these outlines, print them out on your inkjet printer at home, and then you can trace them. Now I'm going to show you how to do this here. So I'm going to play this video and talk over top of it while it's happening. Should it decide to play? There we are. Okay. So I'm using a 9x12 sized canvas board, right? And I order them off of Amazon. I think they're better than the ones you can get from your local dollar store, and they're only $2 instead of $1. Okay, so the video stops there. I'm just going to let's catch up here. So I tape it down, and then I'm going to use some carbon paper. I slide the carbon paper, the shiny side down. That's always very important. And then I'm going to trace this image. I'm going to do most of the drawing here. I think there's might be a few little things I skip, but really the most important part is obviously the horse itself. Some of the other little lines in there just sort of denote areas where there's maybe a little bit more white, etc. Let's see, what do I do here? I turn this around, I think. And when you're all done, you want to just make sure that you've done the lines that you want and you haven't forgot any major lines. Right, and then I decided I needed to do the eye a little bit more. There we go. And then when you've got that done, you can peel it off and then save this just in case maybe perhaps you might want to use it again. Okay. So now that we've got our image onto the canvas, we're going to go to the next step here. And the next step is what we call the Imprimatura, right? And the Imprimatura is the first layer of color. And maybe before I do that, I just want to, so we're all on the same page, we know what colors I'm using when I talk about a cool blue or a cool red or a warm yellow, etc., right? So this is the brand I'm using. I'm not sponsored by anyone. Here's another brand. Of course, I've explained this in depth previously. You can watch the intro painting class, but if you want to use Golden, there may be a little bit higher quality paints than what I'm using. If you want to use Liquitex, here's the selection of paints I suggest. Winsor & Newton, Artist's Loft, they're the Michael's Art Supply chain brand. Buzz, Peebo, Holbein, and Daler-Rowney, right? So that gives you kind of a good selection of possible colors that you could choose. So I am going to get my paint out here and start this process. So everything that I use can fit inside of, this is like just a shoebox, and I know that a lot of people watching right now do not have a dedicated paint space. You don't have a studio. I'm lucky to have a studio where I can go in and leave everything when I go for dinner or when I'm reading stories to our daughter, but that's not always the case for everyone. So the more mobile your system is, your whole setup, I think the easier it is to actually get a painting done. So, and I know what that's like. I've when I was much younger, you know, I had roommates, and I'd paint on the kitchen table, and you'd have to clean everything up after a couple of hours and put everything away. And so I try to, when these classes, approach it in the same sort of way. So you'll see that I've mixed a little bit of water into this warm yellow just to make it a little bit thinner. The water is going to help it dry just a little bit faster, and it makes it just a little bit thinner. You can really think of this as a stain. You're staining the canvas. I personally do not like the look of just the white canvas at all. And this, what we're doing, is a very traditional method that artists have been using for about 500 years. Now, very few of them used a warm yellow like I'm doing, or maybe none of them, I don't know. Most traditionally, you'd use something like a rusty red color. It would be kind of thinned appropriately like this, because the idea is to get a mid value, right? Something that is, if we think of our value scale, like we talked about in the intro painting class a few weeks ago, on one side you have white, and on the other side you have black, right? And then in between there you have all sorts of different shades of gray. And you can have all sorts of different shades of yellow. You can have, on one side we go yellow, 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 so light we tint it until it just becomes white, and we go all the way until that yellow becomes black. And by applying a color like this, we sort of go right in the middle, and that way we can darken the painting and lighten the painting. Also, this is a strategy that artists use even more specifically for landscape painting and portrait painting. Okay. Great to see some familiar faces there in the chat. So, I think in fact, I just want to show, just before we move on, that let's just take a look at the painting, and although there is some white that he's applied here, we can see that there's, I don't know what this color is here, if that's raw canvas, but it's something that is underneath that white. So that gives us an idea that he painted a bit of like an eggshell color, and then he painted white over top of it, or he just painted directly on canvas without any, that wasn't gessoed in any way. And let me see if I have here's a bag, here's a canvas bag, and that gives you an idea of what actual canvas color looks like, right? Because usually canvas is this color, and then sometimes it's dyed white, or it's we have the white gesso on the surface. That's why your canvas usually looks white when you buy it, right? Okay, so I also want to, just before we move on, I'm going to let this dry. I might even hit it with the blow dryer, but I'm going to apply a little bit of white on here to get it started, so that we have that can all just be slowly cooking in the oven while we chat about Franz Marc's biography. So I'm just going to start putting some paint on my palette here. And this is a very colorful painting, so in all likelihood we're going to use every color from this very basic system. I did it again. So that is supposed to be my warm red. In fact, since this is one of our beginner classes, I think it makes most sense to make sure to avoid any confusion. Let's actually... I normally just say whatever, but I know that I want our most beginner painters to be able to follow along, and that kind of confuses me too, because I can switch these labels, but okay. So I'm putting these right now there's 6 colors. I'm gonna have my cool yellow will make 7, including my white, and that was a little bit more. You can see basically I put about as much paint on my palette as I put toothpaste on my toothbrush. And some people are like, that's a lot of toothpaste, or maybe not enough, Michael. So what I want to do is let's mix a color that will kind of replicate this canvas color, right? And so that canvas color is basically just a very light brown, right? It's like so we can make various different kinds of brown. We can make a warm brown or a cool brown. Let's make a cool brown, right? Since it's going to be in the background, and it's going, or should we? You know what? Actually, I'm going to make a warm brown, because this painting actually features a lot of very cool colors. So I think I want to have something just a little bit, with a little bit more warmth coming through there, so that this painting is sort of kind of balanced. Because we'll talk about what he's doing here. Franz Marc is using colors in a very different way than we've talked about before. Because what we try to do is put our warm colors in the foreground and cool colors in the background, so that we can, because those oppositions of colors create depth in a painting. And that's what artists did for 600 years in the Western world, right? We see this in this is episode 200. There's been 200 episodes dedicated to painting, and some episodes I've done 2, 3, 5 paintings. So there's probably about 300 paintings we've done, and I would say maybe 260 of them use warm and cool colors in the traditional fashion. But there's been a few other artists that have done the exact opposite. Artists like Edvard Munch, the Scream, the Scream painting. We did a few Picasso paintings where he also inverted the warm and cool colors, and Franz Marc here is also inverting the warm and cool colors, right? Because this horse right in the foreground, this is our cool blue. This is a cyan. We've got a cool yellow here. We've got our magenta red, right? So there's a lot, and we got a warm red in the foreground, and a kind of some cool greens. So there's a lot of cool colors in here. So in order just to kind of give some balance, I think, and this is going to be very, very subtle. Because we're going to put so much white in it, whether it's warm or cool is almost irrelevant. But I do think that the warm browns tend to be just a little bit. In fact, I'll just show you. Because since we did this, why am I not? I'll just show you. This is the difference between a warm brown and a cool brown, right? We could see that it's got a little bit more of a muddier kind of quality, right, as opposed to a little bit of a brighter, warmer quality. So let's mix a warm brown. We don't need to do too much of it. I'm going to take a little bit of this warm yellow, a little bit of warm red, even less, so maybe 3-to-1 warm yellow. Let me get this orange. And now to help turn it into a brown, I'm going to take a little bit of warm blue. You see very little of it. And I'm not even going to put all of it in. You see how I wipe a little bit of that off? Okay. So the goal is I want to get a very light brown. In fact, let's just mix a different brown just so you can see. If I took more red and mixed it into with that blue, you can see we get, let's take a little bit more of this. You can see now we've got a much darker brown, right? So it's just playing with those ratios, we're going to get different kind of colors. So if you mixed your color and you got a color like that, that's okay. But I think we'd want something a little bit more like that. And if you did get a brown that was much darker like that, what I would do is, rather than trying to mix it again, is I would just take the paint that's on my brush and just mix it all over again, basically diluting it with some more warm yellow, right? And we get basically the same color again. All right? And if you tried to mix a brown and it looked kind of greenish, that would tell me we've got probably a little bit too much blue. And if it just looked really, really red, right, then it's probably got a little bit more red in it. Right? So anyway, this gives us an idea. This is the color that I think we want. And I'm going to apply it all over the entire canvas. So let's mix it a little bit. We don't need much, right? We'll start out with just the paint on my paintbrush, and I'm going to mix it into this white here. This is going to give me that kind of eggshell color. It gets us, whoops, pretty close to the color of the canvas, right? We don't have to be, too concerned about making it perfect, but that's good enough for government work, as my grandfather used to say. So next what I'm going to do is I am going to use a little bit of medium now that I think about it, but you could easily have skipped this warm yellow and just gone right to this and added some water into this. Now the reason why I'm not going to add water into this is if I do that, I'm more than likely going to scrape off the yellow that I put on here and could turn into a bit of a mess. So that's good, but now I think I need a little bit more white. Just a little bit more. And we'll stir this up and paint it all over the background. So let's see what this looks like. So by putting this matte, the matte medium, and matte medium is just acrylic paint without any color in it. And I'm afraid I'm going to run out, so let's put a bit more on here. Now the more of that matte medium I put into this mixture, the thinner, the more transparent this color gets. So I always think it's easier to start with a bit more of a transparent color, because I'm going to paint this over top of the drawing, and if it's too opaque, the white that's in here will just completely obliterate all my lines, and I want to preserve those lines. I spent all that time doing the outlining. I don't want them to disappear. So I'm going to take this and just cover this canvas. And worst comes to worst, if you do this, oh, you can see I got a little bit of the, let's zoom out. My canvas was still a little bit wet with that warm yellow, so some of that warm yellow's mixing into this paint, which is, not it's not something I wanted, but it's happening and it's not that big of a deal. There might be other paintings, like let's say I wanted to have a lot of this canvas exposed, or the look of a lot of this eggshell color here, then that would be, I would certainly have spent a little bit of time blow drying in between layers to prevent that from happening, but what are you gonna do? It's so subtle that, and a lot of this is going to be covered with other colors anyway, so. So really, I'm kind of now thinking, well, let's just try to blend it into the overall painting. And if you've got maybe a little bit much, or your lines are a little bit hidden, you can just try to wipe some of the paint off your canvas. Now I have maybe another 10 seconds of this before that matte medium starts to dry on the canvas, and then I start getting some strange effects here. It's already starting to happen. There you go. So I gotta, that's as much as the paint will allow me to do. And of course, I can't stop. Okay. So that's that. So I'm just gonna clean my table up just a little bit. I've got all that paint all over the place. Just like a nice clean work surface. And if you keep your table or your surface kind of clean while you're working, it makes it easier to clean up at the end, right? Especially because, you know, acrylic paint can, once it starts to dry, it can be really difficult to get off of surfaces. So if it's still a little bit wet, it's just a little bit of a time-saving thing. Now you can see it's a little bit streaky and there's a little bit more yellow at the top. If I was really concerned here, I would just let it dry and maybe use a little bit more of the leftover paint that I have just to kind of clean that up, but it is what it is. It's okay. Okay. Get that in the middle. So... more Russian trolls attacking the stream there. That's if whenever you guys see those things, people posting links to some website, never click on them. Obvious. I mean, I hope that's pretty obvious. It's just these automatic robots that just spam live stream things here on YouTube. Okay. So, that's where we're going to be in about an hour and a half. So let's take a look let's take a look at the biography of Franz Marc now, because it's pretty remarkable how much he accomplished in a relatively short period of time. Let's look at. Here he was born in 1880 and dies in 1916 in Munich, which at the time was the capital of the Kingdom of Bavaria, right? So today we consider part of Germany, and it's just a reminder of how different the world was pre-World War I. You had a lot more smaller regional governments, and all of them had little alliances with different ones. So one of the factors of World War I is all of a sudden when the assassination of Franz Duke Ferdinand happened, all of a sudden all of these countries who had all these different alliances were just instantly sucked into this conflict. Not too much unlike what's happening today, right? So let's see. So maybe let's talk a little bit about this while we look at his art. So Franz Marc, 1880. He originally his father was a painter, was a fairly accomplished landscape painter. So when Franz Marc was very young, his father taught him how to paint, right? And his mother was a devout Calvinist, and which is a kind of Protestant religious belief, right? And when he was kind of the age of going to college, he initially went to school to go into a seminary, right? But he switched out pretty quickly. I think after about a year, he switched to go to art school at the School of Art in Munich. And he stayed there for about 2.5 years, although he was pretty disappointed because a lot of what he was learning was stuff that he had already learned years before from his father, right? And also at this time, there's a lot of the avant-garde is really starting to kind of become more and more important in terms of art in Europe specifically. So he leaves art school before he graduates in 1903. So these would be paintings he probably made while he was in school in Munich. And then he moves to Paris in 1903, and while he's there, he meets Matisse, he meets Picasso, he meets Robert Delaunay and Sonia Delaunay. He meets all of these artists in Paris and who are doing things that are very different to what he was learning in school and what he was learning from his father, or what he had learned from his father. And instantly he's like, wow, like, you just imagine you're a 22-year-old kid, you've been studying all this stuff, you move to Paris, and all of the people your age are doing something completely different to what is you've seen in school and museums, right? You're like, whoa, this is so, it would be sort of like a kid moving from wherever to New York in the 1950s and the beginning of rock and roll happening, right? Like Bob Dylan, for instance, like going from country into rock and roll. So that, I think, immediately was very inspiring to him, and he started exploring some of these different ways that artists had for making paintings. Now, he stays in Paris until, I think, 1907, and after he returns back to Munich, and when he's in Munich, he becomes friends with August Mack and Vasily Kandinsky. We did a Kandinsky painting and recalled just a few weeks ago. And together they form the Blue Rider group, or Der Blue Reiter, and which is not only just a kind of a small art movement of about 5-6 people, but also they published a journal, right? They published a magazine, basically, or maybe a zine, as you might call it today. And together they spent a lot of time, obviously, thinking about color. They obviously had a lot of sympathetic ideas of what color could do. Remember, as we talked with Kandinsky, this idea that color, up until then, color was just used to describe, you see an apple, you paint the apple red. You see a banana, you paint the banana yellow. That's, as far as everyone was concerned, that's what color is for, is to describe what you see. Kandinsky, in particular, was sort of someone who's like, that is really cutting color short. Color could be so much more. What if we freed color from its responsibility to describe the visible world, the surface of things, but what if we could use color to describe what's happening inside of us and inside of other things, right? Because they saw surfaces of things as basically masks, that not only a mask on our face, but that hides our true emotions and feelings and thoughts and beliefs, but that everything around us was covered in masks, that this is covered in a mask. What is actually beyond the visible world, right? So he's also becomes a huge fan of Van Gogh at this time. Van Gogh he's been dead for about 30 years, but is now becoming, his paintings have been kind of spreading around. And Van Gogh also had some very spiritual, emotional connections to color, as obviously. So obviously the paintings we start getting much more experimental paintings. He also, when he met Matisse, you could see the influence of Matisse in some of these paintings, and Gauguin, who was a friend of Van Gogh's, and Gauguin died, I think, around 1903, which was a big deal in the art world. There was a big, not a parade, like a funeral procession down the streets in Montmartre in Paris. It was global news because Gauguin had become quite a famous painter, and Gauguin would have used colors like this. We're going to do a couple of Gauguin paintings coming up shortly in the next few months. Obviously, this is the painting we're going to do today. One of the things that you'll see pretty much going forward here is Franz Marc paints animals almost exclusively. From this point on, we have animals, a few figures here, but he really saw animals as being as an example of this pure state that nature could be in, and that humans were kind of corrupt and materialistic, and so he saw animals as this kind of ideal, and that humans were animals, but that we were these kind of corrupt animals. So that's why he kind of really focuses on painting animals, because he saw them as being this like very positive force in the world. So you can also see he becomes influenced by the new Cubist movement that has just started and is spreading quickly, and also another movement called Futurism, which is similar but different. I don't know. We haven't done a futurist painter, I don't think. We'll have to think about that, because that's also a movement I'm really interested in. Let's see. I mean, these are really these beautiful abstract paintings. We've got cats and dogs and horses, all sorts of different animals. So those of you who are interested in animals, for sure, there's certainly a lot of these paintings to look at. And you can see we're almost at the bottom down here. And what happens at this time, right at the very end? World War I breaks out. Franz Marc is conscripted into the German military as a cavalryman. So he's riding a horse, and he's there on the front lines helping to maneuver artillery into position. And he's in the war for several years, and he's fairly, he's obviously he was decorated. When it sort of comes out that he has some artistic ability, he's asked to help paint some camouflage to help hide the artillery that he's been pulling around with his horse. So he's painting on these giant canvases, oddly enough in this kind of pointillist style, right? It's really interesting. A lot of the, there was these razzle-dazzle patterns, as they were called, which were kind of this neo-cubist painting technique. If you look that up, in fact, maybe I'll just show you here. During World War I, there was a lot of these ships. Isn't these are just crazy. During World War I, you had all these boats that were started to be painted in this razzle-dazzle pattern, as they were called, right? Which is coinciding with Cubism. So it's funny, we think of like art as sort of just this thing that happens off in these studios somewhere and these wacky artists, but clearly all of these military leaders were like, what can we, we've got all these boats going back and forth over the Atlantic. What can we learn from this that can help make these boats survive, right? So this is the kind of thing. It's obviously a little bit different than what Franz Marc was doing, but it is pretty interesting. Now, sadly enough, in 1916, the German government, or Bavarian government, realizes that there's a whole bunch of very accomplished people like Franz Marc that are on the front lines fighting this war. Doctors, scientists, mathematicians, artists, poets, and they're dying. They're being killed. And so the order goes, and Franz Marc makes that list of people that need to be pulled back from the front lines and given other roles, sent back to Munich and elsewhere. Unfortunately, the news arrives too late. Franz Marc is killed in action in the Battle of Verdun, which is a particularly nasty battle of World War I, kind of back and forth. And so he dies before really fulfilling his destiny as one of the great artists of the last century. So let's just sort of take a quick look at the painting that we're about to work on today. So this painting is 44 inches by 33 inches, which, we're painting on a 9x12 sized canvas, so you can do the math. There's basically 4 times the size tall. We could basically stack 4 of these canvases side by side, and about 3 of them to the right. So it's a, we're talking something it's kind of that big, right? So that's a sizable painting. So when we look at ours, and if you're having a little bit of difficulty painting it, just remember that almost every single painting that you see reproduced in a book or magazine is usually at the very least 2, 3, 4, 5 times larger than the size of a piece of paper, I guess, right? So there's lots of really interesting things that we can talk about here. So there's also some really, I was reading a couple of theses, PhD theses on his color theory. So maybe let's get right into the next step here. So typically it's something that we do is often do what's called the underpainting. And what the underpainting is a little bit of outlining. Often an artist might prep the canvas by putting an Imprimatura down and then just start sketching it out with a pencil or a paintbrush. Literally just instantly start painting lines on there or shapes to begin with. Let's see if Franz Marc did anything like that in today's painting. I can't really see any pencil marks in here. He did about 5 of these paintings. So this is the first one. I don't really see any pencil marks in here, so he probably painted this with this cool blue outline to begin with. So let's do that. We're gonna paint just like he did directly onto the canvas. And we do have a cool blue. I think I'm just going to make it a little bit darker. So let's do that. Actually, this is still a little bit wet, so I might blow dry that as well. But let's get this color mixed. So here's my cool blue. And to make a darker color, what I'm going to do is mix my warm red into my cool blue. Because what that does is it's going to sort of pull those colors together. When we take colors that are opposite from one another on the color wheel, they get close to the neutral core, if not cross the neutral core together, right? All together. So if we just look at this is, we've got our colors basically in the same sort of position. Our cool blue is over here, our warm blue is over here. So if we take a little bit of this warm red and mix it into our cool blue, we get a kind of purple that is much closer to the neutral core. So it's lost a lot of its color intensity. If you want a really nice intense purple, the purple that probably comes to mind when you think of purple, we instead want to mix it with our cool red and warm blue because they're much closer together on the color wheel. So instead we're going to add a little bit of this into this color, and it's going to get us a darker color. Now if we wanted to turn it into a black, we just add a bit of cool yellow into it. So it takes this color and sucks it right into the center, right? And actually it does look like there might be just a little bit of that much darker color here, but that would be probably at the very, very end of the painting. Okay, so let's take a little bit of warm red and a little bit of cool blue, and we'll mix this together. So that was maybe like 3-to-1 cool blue to warm red. Okay. And then I'm just going to take a smaller brush, and I'm going to paint with this. I'm going to clean this little brush off. Notice I wipe the paint off before I put it in my water, and that just keeps the water relatively clean. That way I don't have to go clean my brushes every few minutes or change the water every few minutes, right? Okay, now this canvas is still a little bit wet, so I'm just going to hit it with the blow dryer for a couple seconds. So I'll mute the audio for one. Okay, so it's not totally perfectly dry, but as we paint on it, it's going to get a little bit more like that. Okay, let's zoom in. Maybe not quite. Let's leave it. There we are. Okay. So if we look at the original, we'll put them side by side here, and just think about. Basically, it looks almost like what he did is mostly just painting the horse. So, and I wouldn't worry about making these lines too perfect, because we're probably going to go over some of them later on. And it's okay if the lines get a little bit light like this, if they get a little bit transparent. Because what that is, that's called a dry brush. You know, when your paint gets dry and we don't have wet paint on the brush anymore. We have a dry brush, and that dry brush is, you know, maybe for some people is really undesired or undesirable, but it's actually something that some artists embrace, like today's artist, who liked the dry brush look. In fact, let's maybe zoom in even a little bit more. And how about we'll take a look at this? I'll just sort of show kind of where are we? So probably he did something like this directly onto the canvas, just sort of painting around, maybe a little bit faster than what I'm doing, because he was still trying to figure out where everything was going to go. Although I don't really see too many hesitation marks or erasing or wiping away. So maybe maybe I should actually, I'm totally wrong. I should restate it. Probably he might have done this really slowly, because he might, if we don't see those hesitation marks, like some artists, like maybe we see in some Picasso paintings, especially later Picasso or later Matisse, we see a lot of paint lines, and then some of it's like wiped away because they're sketching directly onto the canvas, and for the very first time, and things have to be moved and changed, and so we don't really see that in this painting. So that kind of tells me that he probably had a very clear idea of what he wanted to do, and then probably took his time plotting it out onto the canvas with paint, just like we're doing now. Okay. We also don't need to get every line on here, but it is kind of helpful to have the majority of at least the horse outlined on here. There's a few other little areas like the palm, or not palm tree, the leaves down there. Right, so this is, you can see this dry brush happening, and we see that in the painting. You can even see the texture of the canvas as the brush goes over it. So, you know, there are other paintings where we would go over and really try to get a more refined edge here, but that's not something he's concerned about, especially at this stage. And it looks like in only a few places did he even at the end go and try to outline as well. Okay, have we got, that might be, we do see other colors. What I'm looking for though is the lines that he would have done with a color like what we've got here. Sometimes you'll see artists that will do that all over the place, but I don't really see. I do see, looks like in here, that there was some, and then he's kind of, it's got blended into the paint. So let's maybe do a little bit of that on here. Again, just trying to allow for that dry brush. Well, we're going to do a lot of dry brushing shortly, especially on the horse. So we'll have an opportunity to kind of play and practice that technique here. Okay, I think that's good. I think we've got that first layer of paint on here, or underpainting, accomplished. That's good. So now I'm just going to clean this brush. You can see there's obviously more details in here that I'm not going to do just yet. We'll get there, because this is just still this first stage of the painting. Oh, there's Deborah, Lolly, Tanya, Paula, John, Sandra. the next step. What we're going to do now that we've got our initial underpainting down, is let's start painting in the background. We're going to start filling some color in there, and we might be able to do the whole background in one pass here. So, because the way that he painted this painting is very loosely, right? These colors are like, there's an immediacy, a spontaneity, and a speed that he's applying color in here, which we're going to try to embrace a little bit of, right? That's going to involve us mixing our colors ahead of time and then trying to paint them with a certain amount of speed. Like these type of brush strokes, those are fast brush strokes, and you can certainly take your time. I don't want to rush anybody, but I think it is kind of fun to learn that there's different ways to apply paint. You know, if you think about like more classical types of painting, we have very laborious, slow brush strokes, which at the end are intended to become invisible. Like the Mona Lisa is a famous example of a painting that took Leonardo da Vinci 15 years to paint. Now, he wasn't painting on it every day, 9 hours like a businessman going to work, but he painted very, like, because he would paint a layer, and that layer might take a month to dry. So you do a little bit here and there and paint around here, let that dry, work on a few other things, and there's a lot of unfinished Leonardo paintings around. Then he'd come back and do a little bit more over a long period of time. And Kathy's just watching, has been in the garden all day. That sounds nice. It was a pretty lovely day out today. So if you had a chance to get out and do a little bit of gardening, that's great, because we're heading into the spring already. Isn't that crazy? Okay, so our first color is, we have a cool blue. We've been using cool blue already. Now, one of the things is we could take our cool blue right off of the palette or out of the tube, and I think we could paint that there. Now, I did say that in the foreground we have a cool blue, but this, especially now that I see it, this is much more of a what we call like a cobalt blue, which exists almost kind of in between our colors, right? So we've definitely got that cool blue that is in the, our cool blue is right up in here. We don't really have a warm blue, like a bright warm blue like this, like our ultramarine blue, but we've got this color is actually much, it's kind of exists in between here. Now, people will always say to me, well, that must mean that's a neutral blue. That's neither warm nor cool, which is a fair assumption, but remember that every color is either warm or cool, some more than others, right? An example might be, if you have quote-unquote room temperature water, does that mean that water is neither warm nor cold? I mean, it's not really, it's, you know, I don't know. We've talked about this before. A lot of this is opening up Pandora's box here, but so I'm going to take some of my cool blue without any other color on it, right? Remember, I got a little bit of that warm red in there to make our outlining. So I'm just going to, I don't want to have too much on my brush. In fact, it's almost like I get the paint on the brush and then I wipe it off, because I want to have a little bit of this dry brush quality. And another thing artists might do is take paint, if you've got a lot of paint on your brush, and just wipe it off on a rag like that to get a drier brush. Now, it seems kind of wasteful. Like, what do you mean? I'm going to put paint on my brush, wipe it off before I put it on the canvas? That's crazy. Well, depending on the technique you want, that might be the best way of doing what we're about to do here. So let's take some of this paint, wipe a little bit off, and then let's just paint in this area in behind here. And let's get a little bit more. Again, we're going to keep kind of a fairly dry color. And notice as I start to kind of blend it out, the paintbrush gets drier and drier. And now it feels sort of like I'm just scrubbing with the paint. Right? You might get places where it's a little bit heavier than others. Right? Now, you can see that as I scrub it and it gets drier and drier, it gets oops, sorry, I want to go the other way. A little bit more transparent. Right? And remember, this is the area where there was a bit more of that yellow, so that's why it's gone a little bit greenish looking. I don't mind it personally, but I'm going to take maybe a little bit more paint this time, rather than wiping so much off, because at the very top there is more paint on his brush. And that's why we get that darker, deeper blue up here. All right, some of these faster brush strokes. And I guess you could do a little bit more, but maybe I'll keep it kind of like that for now. So let's move on to another place where we've got a little bit of blue, which is right next to the head of the horse here. Let's take a little bit more of this. And again, I'll get some on my paintbrush and just wipe a bit of it off. Okay, let's just see how that looks. Cool. You know what? I'm just going to even take my brush without even... Well, let's get a little bit more paint on here. And again, just wipe a bit off. And I see there's this other little bit of blue here. And there we go. I guess this one goes a little bit closer into the touches of the face here, right? Because you could see he allows some of the paint, there's little areas between the colors. Okay. So, that's our first little bit of paint in the background. I'm going to clean this, well, actually I was going to clean it off, but I think let's make a green now, because that's one of the next colors that we see here. So we're going to make a cool green that we can apply in all over the place. So let's take some of our cool blue and cool yellow. And if we just add a little bit of this blue that remains on the brush here, I mix this here and we've got a pretty light, very saturated green, like a yellow green. All right, so I'm going to take that. Again, not so much paint. It's a little bit heavier, thicker here anyway, so I'm not so worried about painting it too dry brush in this area. Right in between these legs. That's a little bit thin, right? That color isn't quite as vibrant as his. So there's two things we could do. We could add a little bit of white in there, which is going to, make it a little bit more opaque. I just actually notice there's a little bit of red there, so let's take a bit of that off. I think instead I want to keep this color quite vibrant, so I might just leave it like this and do another layer here in a moment. There is some white down here, however. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a little bit more painting with this same color down there below. And then I might come back with a little bit of white here shortly. So I think I'll just zoom out for a moment just so we can see a little bit more how this might work. So let's paint this area in, again, pretty quickly. And you can see we see all these brush strokes in there. Some artists hate that. They hate this kind of brush strokey stuff. Franz Marc, on the other hand, seemed to kind of really like it. Now that my brush is getting a little bit drier, maybe even I want to see if I can get a little bit more of this off. So I'll take my brush here and then just kind of dry brush in here like that. Let's actually, you know, before I move on, what I'm going to do is put a little bit of white on my palette. And I'm just going to take some of this paint here, mix a bit of white into it. That's actually, that got very minty very quickly. So I'm just going to take this and then just paint it kind of directly in here in a few places. Maybe, you know what, I will paint in this area here just really quickly. I think I'm still going to come back here and add a little bit more of this color there. But now let's go up to the top. I'm going to take this same color, warm yellow, warm blue, a little bit of white. I'm going to paint it right up here. I'm also going to paint it a bit right in here. Okay. Anywhere else? Oh, maybe a little bit right up here. See, he's just done a little bit like that. Okay. Oops. Sorry, I thought I was more zoomed out than I was. So I just did a little bit down here with a bit more of a drier brush. Okay. Now, I think what I want to do is we need this darker green in a few places. Where's the other one? Right here and here. So I need to wash my brush to get the white off of my brush. Right, because the next color here doesn't have any white. It has not been tinted. So we need, if we add this white in, if there's white on our brush and we make this next color, it's going to go teal, which is a lovely color. It's one of my favorite colors, but not really the color we want right now. So it's helpful to have a cleaner brush. And this color is our green, but it's got a lot more blue in it. All right, so here's green just like that. And actually, well, you know what, I want to use that color back here again, but let's instead, let's stay on track and put a little bit more of this blue in here. So that gives us a really nice darker green. And we'll now paint with it. Down here, I'm going to paint thicker. I've got a lot of paint on my brush, so I'm going to paint this a little bit thicker on the sides here. To get started. Right, and if you sort of do what I did there, you just wipe it away a little bit. It's okay if the colors get a little smudgy. You can always extend that line as long as you want, right? Or we could paint over that later. No biggie. Let's see. Sort of like this. Now, that's going to get darker again. I think we'll do another layer of it shortly. But what I want to do is I'm just going to wipe this paint off. Even just wipe it off on my brush. Now, I'm not going to put it in the sink or in the water, but now I can just take this like a little bit of a dry brush here. Okay. So what we want is kind of like those little highlights. Okay. I think, oh, we wanted a little bit of green down here as well. Now this looks a little bit more like a warmer green, to be honest. But I think I'm going to paint it with this dark color now, and then we can always paint a warmer green over top. Right, so I'm going to take this same color. Actually, let's get a little bit more. Actually, no, I'm going to take the same color. Let's do this area first. Because I think it might be helpful to see what it looks like now as a cool green. And then when we make it a little bit more warm, how that color will change. You can see these two things have sort of joined up together, which is not ideal, but we can always fix that. There's never a problem too big for painting. Okay, let's take a bit more of the yellow. And you know, now this color looks a lot like the color I had before there. Not that big of a deal. I'm going to paint, while I have it though, this color a little bit more over some of these areas. Including maybe a little bit back down here. And maybe a bit up here. So what I'm doing is something a lot of artists will do, is once you've got a little bit of paint on your brush, kind of see if there's other places that need that same color, that you can kind of just go, well, I'll put a little bit more, blah, 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 there and there. Okay. Maybe before I move on, I want to try to resolve this area just a bit more. So we've done that first layer of that. I mean, those colors look pretty good, but I think it needs to be darker. So remember we mixed this color before? This was our cool blue with warm red, and we got that color. What if I take a bit of this color and mix it into my green? My darker green here. Ooh, now I've got an even darker green to paint with. Look at that. and we can keep on getting darker and darker and darker if we want. We can even mix a kind of a black towards the end if we like. See, it looks like there's a little drip that happened there, so I'm just gonna simulate that a little bit. Okay. Again, we can make that even darker as we go. Maybe let's just see what happens if we take this slightly darker red. Is that too... Yeah, we want to make this a little bit more warm for sure, but I'm always curious to see. Maybe we can get away with it. Doesn't look quite like that. Let's see, maybe... What if I add just a bit more yellow into this color? For this area right here. Oh, how did I make... There's supposed to be a bit of purple here, isn't there? Oh, that's funny. Let's extend that up. Okay. There we go. Let's move on here. What should we do next? How about some red? Let's do the red. So maybe it's worth actually just taking a quick second here just to talk about the color theory behind Marc's paintings. So one thing that's kind of interesting is, and you can, I don't think I posted this, I'll post this in the description after class, but you can read the full thesis here. What is really interesting is that these authors actually tried to apply Franz Marc's concept of color theory and tested it in like a scientific fashion, and they got results that were not far off of what Marc believed. Now I think this, let me know if that, okay, that's, audio is muted, okay. Let me see. So essentially this idea that blue to him signified was a male color, and not only that, was represented spirituality to him, whereas yellow represented oops, why is that way off? There we are. Whereas yellow represented the female, a more, and he considered sort of his interiority to be a more female, or everyone's to be much more of a feminine attribute, and then red to be this brutal, violent, almost malevolent kind of force that is always around us, and that both the male and female are always sort of doing battle with. And so what's really interesting is that these scientists sort of got, people together, and they had them label different colors in very, very quickly, like trying to get them to respond very quickly. And they ended up basically reproducing the exact same results that Franz Marc, Vasily Kandinsky, and August Macke hypothesized. I think that's really very, very, very cool. So let's apply, what did I say, the violent red color here. So we've got two different reds as well. This is our warmer red up here with some white in it, and this is our cooler magenta color, and then this is warmer red down here. So where should we, let's start with our warm red, why not, right? So let's start with warm red. this cool fan on my overhead camera blowing right in my face, and it's cold. So this the warm red right out of the tube. There's a lot of red down here, so before I do any dry brushing, I'm just going to take this color and paint it directly in here. Okay. And you can also, you don't have to go, you can overlap the colors. You can also leave little gaps of color as well, as he did. And you notice when you paint over some, like when you paint a red over a blue or vice versa, that color tends to get very dark. Because they're kind of mixing, right? They're opposite from another color wheel, so they simulate that color going over into the neutral core. Let's do a little bit more of this right here. A bit more warm red. And then we have some warm red here. That is going to get, we're going to use a bit of a dry brush again in a second. So I'll put a bit like that. And then I'm going to try to wipe as much paint off of my brush as possible. That's all. It was almost a little bit much, right? You could see that he's got, but we'll put some yellow back over that. We can bring it down, but that's not bad. So now we need a bit, we got some white. Let's take some of this white. Should probably use a bit more of that. And without even, since I've got a pretty dry brush, I can just take this white just like this. And I can paint this up here. It's got a kind of a pinkish quality, almost a bit of a purple. I think I had a little bit of blue still on my paintbrush there, yeah. That's okay. And then again, it's that dry brush, just pushing that dry paint around. And if we want it to be just a little bit more red, we'll just get a bit more red into that color. I think that might be okay. Might be okay for now. If I want, I could do get a little bit more red, like a really, really dry brush of just pure red, and do that again, maybe in a few places. But we'll have to wait for that to dry. So that might be one of our little finishing touches. So I'll have to remember that. Okay. So many comments there. What? I think I'm missing it. There's a lot of comments in here. I feel like I'm coming in halfway through a conversation, so I'm just gonna keep on going. So it sounds like you guys are having fun. So now let's do our cold red, our magenta, which is in this area right here. So here's our cool red. Now again, this is a little bit, if I paint, we could paint this right here, but I think we need it to be a little bit darker. It's, you know, it's not just pure magenta, it's a little bit darker. Now if I take a little bit of the warm blue and mix this into the color, I'm going to get a really nice, beautiful purple, which is what I do want maybe up here when we actually do want purple. Instead, though, I want something that's going to be a little bit darker. So I'm just going to take a bit of, again, this dark color that we had earlier, that's a lot of it, and just mix a bit of it into this paint. Because that's cool blue and warm red. So now it's still got a bit of a purpley quality, maybe even too much. Let's just get a bit more. In fact, that's maybe take a little bit of yellow. So if I put a little bit of yellow in that, it's going to go black. If I put a bit of yellow into here, it's the same sort of thing. It's sort of turning a bit of the purpley color in there. There we go, yeah. Now we got a much darker crimson-y color. So let's take this and do our kind of what we did previously, right? I got a lot of paint on my brush. So I'll paint with it, and as it gets drier, it gets thinner. Alright, let's do that again down here. And see if that line connects right behind there, right? Or how does it go? It's kind of a, I'm not sure. Anyway, it's supposed to be just sort of going behind that leg in some way. And we'll take our dry brush. He's got a little bit of white in here as well. We will do that, but maybe we can just get away with a dry brush in this area. Not sure. Let's take a bit more of, in fact, this area right here. I see, maybe I should have painted that all green, because that kind of, we get that much darker color that we had there. Okay. So that's okay. I think I do want to make it even darker though. And so what I am going to do is turn this into a bit more of a black. So I'm going to take a little bit more, some yellow, a bit more warm red, and we mix cool blue, warm red, and cool blue, we mix cool blue, cool yellow, and warm red together, we get black. So I'm just turning that into a black officially. And now if we take this and mix this into this color, when we paint be afraid to get your fingers a little dirty too. Now, I think before I move on from that though, let's take a bit of this white and a bit of our magenta. Okay. Again, I'm going to wipe that paint off of my brush and just get a little bit on here. Looks like I needed to get a little bit lighter. Because you see how he's put this in here, probably to distinguish between these two shapes and give a little more volume there. So I think I want maybe just a little bit less of a purpley color, a little bit more of a white. Although actually now, before I do that, I notice he's got this color down here, so actually before I see the more and more I paint, I'm like, oh, I see he's got a bit of this here and there. Let's take a bit of this white. I'm just going to kind of dry brush a little bit with this white here. And then we start getting kind of close to it, right? I think his had... Well, actually, no, I'm pretty close. I was going to say maybe less of a bit of... Because there was some blue in there. I was going to say it should maybe be a little bit more white, but actually, no, kind of... pretty close to the real thing. Okay. So how about let's do our purple now, since we've been talking about this as an opposition to the purple. And you know that this purple is actually not quite as bright of a purple as I kind of initially thought. It's definitely a blue purple, so we could, if we mix with cool red and warm blue together, but it's, let's say, 80% blue, we're gonna get pretty close to that purple. Now you can see that it's almost, you know, it is a little bit on the darker side. Like conceivably we could also try to do this with warm red and cool blue, like very similar to the color we did in the outline, but I'm afraid that that might just get too dark, so I'm gonna go for just maybe the little bit more saturated purple. So I'm gonna take my cool red and my warm blue, we'll mix these together here. Deep purple. Remember, we want this to be mostly blue. You know, if we add a lot more red to it, then we'll sort of get more of a magenta, colder blue, or colder purple, I mean. Okay, so let's now take this color. And I've still got a lot of paint on here, so I'm actually just going to try to wipe some of that off. And paint it like that. That's pretty good. In fact, it could be a little bit darker, but I think that might be fine. I want to let that dry and then probably try that again. Maybe this area here, you know, I probably could have done that with white before. But it is what it is. Let's take some of this white. Again, I'm going to dry brush with this white, so let's take a bit of, just clean this brush off. Let's do that again. Get some more, just barely any paint on the brush. Oops, that's supposed to be all yellow there, right? Okay, so if you make a little mistake like this, I'm just going to get my rag, dip it in some water, and then just gently try to wipe a bit of that away. And this is a pretty dirty rag, so I want something that's maybe not quite as dirty as that, and then wipe a bit away. Now you got to be kind of quick, and you've got to be not too heavy about scrubbing. Otherwise, I'll scrub not only this white that we put down, but then also the yellow, and then we reveal the white of the canvas underneath, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But if you don't want to do that, then you'll be unhappy with it, right? Okay. So let's do the yellow in here. So this is interesting too, because this is a yellow that exists a little bit in between these. I think we'll start with our cool yellow and just see how far this takes us, but I have a suspicion we've got like 90% cool yellow and maybe 10% warm yellow in here. So, but we can always paint with one and then dry brush a little bit of the other over, and we'll get a similar effect that we would get from actually just painting or from mixing those colors. So actually, let's take a bit of that paint off. This is still maybe a little bit wet, so I'm just going to skip that and let it dry as much as possible. Yeah, you can see it's a nice yellow, but I think we need to make it a bit darker. Alright, so that color actually works pretty well over here. Let's see how well it works with a very dry brush over here. There might even just be a bit of yellow in there and a bit of it up there. Okay, so that's good. Let's do what I was saying though. I'm going to take this brush, it's pretty dry. Let's get just a bit of dry, warm yellow on here. And then we can try to scrub a little bit of this color in. See how that works? Again, there's very little pigment. I'm just sort of scrubbing it into the painting. And if you say like, well, it still looks like not quite dark enough. Well, what I see is a little bit of green on here. So I'm just going to take maybe a bit of my previous green that I had. Take a bit more of my warm yellow. Now I think that could go even darker, but I'm going to kind of skip that. I wonder if she'll put a bit of it up here too. I like that color and the effect it gives. That was a little much up here. Maybe it was okay. Definitely that. Let's see if I can get rid of a bit of that yellow. A little bit. Okay. Those are all maybe finishing touches we can come back on. How's this purple doing? Is it ready for another quick layer? Let's take this purple that we painted previously and just see if we can, by painting a little bit more on here, it's going to get a bit more opaque. I think we'll have to do more later on. Okay, moving right along here. Oh, is it Happy International Women's Day? That's right. I totally. As Heidi was saying, yes. Last year we painted. Was it Rachel Carson? What was her name? The woman who wanted to be the first astronaut on Mars. I've tried to get those dates. It just escaped me. Well, there's always next year. So let's look at, now that we've got that layer done, let's move on to the foreground. And really our foreground is the horse itself. So what do we need to do for this horse? Well, again, this blue that I want to use is going to have some elements of cool and warm blue to help kind of separate it a little bit from this purely cool blue in the background, right? Because we had cool blue here. This was done with cool blue and a little bit of warm red to get it a little bit darker. So let's I need a little bit more cool blue. Oh, that's a lot. So we'll take our cool blue. Where should we mix this? Oh, we'll put it right over here. Cool blue, or sorry, that was my warm blue and my cool blue. So if I mix these together, I'm going to get basically the color that exists in between, which is a cobalt blue. I do want it to be more on the cool side though. So even though, so that was my warm blue I put there. I'm just taking a bit of it. It does make quite a change. It definitely, you know, even right there. I don't know if it's going to be that obvious on camera, but it does look much warmer very quickly. So we'll see if I went too far in one direction or another. I think a good place to start with this color to see how we've done is usually where it's maybe more saturated, where we have a little bit more volume of the paint. Let's say in these hoofs. And I don't know, I think that's actually pretty good. I think we've done well. So, I mean, ultimately, almost this entire painting is going to be done with this color, but obviously in various different degrees. Right? So some of it's going to be heavier, and some of it's going to be very lightly dry brushed. Oops. So And when you're dry brushing, you're going to have areas that just all of a sudden some paint squeaks out off of the paintbrush. You're like, ah, where did that come from? I thought you were all dry. So maybe now that my brush is starting to get pretty dry, and I'm doing this carefully, I'm not just sort of scrubbing it on, because I want to try to make sure, I want to just get a light coating, a dusting, if you will, of this lighter blue. You see, I haven't gone back to the well to get more paint on my brush in a while. Now we're going to actually put a little bit of white back on. We're going to like dry brush white back into some of these areas if we need to. So if you go too far, that's okay. So let's take this color again, and let's continue where we kind of left off. We are gonna get darker here, but I want to do this first bit with this maybe a little bit lighter blue that we just mixed over most of this, and then we'll come back with the color that was pretty close to our outlining color towards the very, very end as part of our final layer here. And I'm taking some of this paint that I applied earlier, which is pretty thick, and I'm just trying to blend that out. Kind of pushed my luck by letting it sit there, because sometimes maybe you can get like a ridge might form or whatever, but okay. Getting this little bit of this lighter area here, just using again all dry brush. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with that. Let's I'm going to take the same color. Actually, maybe I'll get a bit more of the ultramarine blue for the main in here. Okay, I think that's pretty good. I see a little bit of a greenish quality here, which might have just been some of this yellow paint mixing in there. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of that. I'm gonna take a bit of this warm yellow. Or sorry, this is a cool yellow, my apologies. Just paint a bit of it in here. I almost suspect this was not intentional on his part, that color just got on his brush as he was passing through this area. But, you know, it kind of does lend it a little something. So we'll leave that. Actually, you know what? While I've got that color, what if we just take it and put it on this little flower in the background? That gets us a little bit closer. Not quite exact, but that's probably good enough. Okay. How are we doing? So many comments there. Marauder667 says, I can't see the blue horse without thinking of that scene in Billy Madison where he draws a green duck. I love Billy Madison. I can't remember that. Now I gotta watch Billy Madison again. Which would drive my wife crazy because she cannot stand Adam Sandler. Although which one is the one that she really liked that I was surprised? Is it Click? Is it the one with the remote control? Which was the only one I hadn't seen, and I think my barber was raving about it. I'm like, really? He's like, oh, it's great. It's like kind of a romantic comedy. It's your wife will probably love it. And I got home and I'm like, I know it's gonna sound crazy, but my barber just said that Adam Sandler movie Click is pretty good. She's like, oh yeah, it's wonderful. It's fantastic. I'm like, wait, who are you? There's an Adam Sandler movie that you like. Okay. I mean, really, we could just call it a day right here, and I think we'd be pretty happy. I think I just want to do a little bit more on the horse. Like, when I see it just on its own, it's like pretty good. You know, when I see it side by side, I'm like, yeah, this could get darker. This could get darker. This could get darker. There's a lot of pushing the contrasts, which I think is helpful, right? The more that we push the contrasts, usually the more depth we get, and the more the more meaty the painting tends to be. Now there are artists whose entire oeuvre is very light contrast. Probably Luc Tuymans, who's a contemporary Belgian painter, is probably one of the most famous painters alive, and he's very famous for very muted color palette. Now I just gotta plug in my camera here. It's about to die in a second. One moment. There we go. Just saved crisis. So let's darken down our horse, right? Should we, if I look at this, I think we could, I think I'm ready to call that we're at the finishing touches phase of today's painting. So let's get in there and do just that. Let's darken this horse. Let's take our dark color. Remember, this is basically a black that we mixed with warm red, cool blue, and cool yellow. And if we mix this in here, obviously it's like adding a little bit of black into this color. Now, I much prefer this to black. If you were going to use black, you'd want to use just like a couple sprinkles. We don't need a lot of it to make it go dark really, really quickly. So I'm going to take this. Let's start painting. That's good. I was almost afraid at first it was a little bit too dark. But now I'm really looking to try to replicate some of the shapes that he's got in these darker areas. If you want, you can also just take your finger and just try to rub those areas out to smooth them, to get a bit of a blending effect. You could also use another brush. Like, I often will just take another brush. Let's say I'll take this. And then you can just take your brush and just sort of gently rub in there. The only thing you just have to keep an eye on is if there's a lot of paint builds up on there, then you're going to be painting with it rather than just blending with it, right? So now this color is pretty close to the original color we did our outlines with, so it's going to blend in and almost look like those were all done at a relatively similar time. Like, one of the things that artists like doing is trying to kind of make it a little difficult for someone else to reverse engineer, to do what we're doing right now. Artists kind of have notoriously been very secretive about their process, and I once read there was an exhibition in Los Angeles where I used to live for many years, at the Hammer Museum of Art, which is affiliated with UCLA, and it was called The Scene of the Crime. And it was talking about how the viewer of an artwork is like a detective who looks at a painting and tries to reason their way back in time to the artist in the studio and to see if they can figure out how it was done. Now, I remember I had a teacher who hated that entire, he was like, oh, it's just like, cannot stand that whole attitude towards painting. We should just look at painting as they are rather than like how they were made, which is like exactly the opposite of my own philosophy. I'm more interested in thinking about how an artist made a painting than just standing in front of it in awe, like, oh, beautiful painting. I'm like, oh, instantly looking up at it, trying to figure out how it was made. And so needless to say, there was some disagreements between myself and that teacher. I see in the chat there, Marauder says, can you help me understand the concept of cool blue versus warm blue? Like, is there a coldest color? You know, I did do an entire episode focused on on the color temperature. So probably me trying to give you the 2-minute or 10-second Twitter description of how that works it could end up confusing you maybe more than just me trying to do it right now. Because I think I mean, I like to think I did a pretty good job of explaining it. And a lot of the artists that are watching right now have, you know, been with me for a few years and I think understand it pretty clearly. And they might be able to let you know whether I did a good job or not. But is there a coldest color? Again, there's lots of disagreements about that. Most people would probably say that green is your coldest color on your palette, like the cool green, a warm or cool yellow and cool blue together make a cool green, kind of like this color that we have here. Some would consider that to be your coldest color, which might fly in the face of what some people would say, like, really, I would say that this cold blue that we're painting right now, that's clearly the coldest color. Isn't blue or a very, very cold color? So I don't know, I don't even know if it's helpful to think of like what the coldest color is beyond just sort of, you know, musing about it, because I don't really know, I can't really think of a situation where we'd want to be applying just the coldest color. It's an interesting, I mean, just, I guess it's kind of a nerdy art question, and I mean that in the best sense. I would certainly consider myself to be an art nerd. So the link to that video where we talk all about warm and cool colors, I think that was episode 3 or 4 of the Master Study Intro to Painting course, and that should be in the link in the description below as one of the very first videos as part of that series. I don't know if that's probably not what you want to hear. You probably just want the answer, but if we, yeah, because in that video I show some color charts and color wheels, and you can kind of see through that. But basically every color is either warm or cool, and it's just sort of your job as an artist to learn them and then to deploy them when you want, however you want. Like in this case, Franz Marc is really not using warm and cool colors the way that Leonardo da Vinci used warm and cool colors, or Rembrandt, or any of the other great masters of Renaissance, or even the Impressionists, right? The Impressionists certainly used warm and cool colors because they very often didn't use black, which is often one of the colors we use to create strong contrast and value, right? They just used different blues and greens and reds for space in the picture. But what I think is kind of fun, that's one of the reasons I chose Franz Marc for today's painting, is because I wanted to talk a little bit about this dry brush technique. But I also think it's just helpful to see that not everybody uses the same approach. In fact, almost artists are notoriously contrarians, and as soon as one person says, this is the way you got to do it, there's another artist is like, you know, hold my beer, I'll be right back. Right? Who's just like, I'm gonna like challenge that whole approach. Looks like this light behind me just turned off. That's the thing, when you have your lights can all be controlled by an app on your phone, sometimes they just turn off. Like sometimes you notice the lights just, I don't know, if what's responsible for that, if that's, I just like to think that it's Putin hacking me. Let's bring this back here, and we can see we're pretty close. As I said, we could have stopped a little bit earlier on, and certainly many beginners, if they would be pretty happy to have gotten to that stage. You know, how much more do we really want to do here? You know, if we're just very delicate with our dry brush, we can get a lot of these effects that he's got here. Okay, I think what we want to do is just one more pass at this, but with an even darker. So let's just take our darkest color again and mix this back into here, so we just have less and less of the actual blue and just mostly that dark color. And now we can kind of just go zero into a few places, like particularly these hoofs. This is almost a bit too dark. I'm gonna go with it, but I could, you know. I will say, though, that, you know, again, understanding warm and cool temperatures, whether you want to embrace it, like many of the great artists of the past, or reject it, or play with it like Franz Marc did, which I don't think he rejected it. I'm sure he was very well aware of it, but he was sort of flipping it on its head, just like, again, Edvard Munch did, because Munch he deliberately played with the inversion of those to create this kind of uncanny strangeness in the painting, where the cool colors are in the foreground, warm colors in the background, so that when you're looking at it like a painting, like The Scream, one feels some kind of anxiety of like, something's wrong with this picture, or is it just me? I don't. The vast majority of people, even other artists, would have like, I don't know why, but that painting just works. It just is. And when you understand how warm and cool colors work, it's like, now we can manipulate, you know, the viewer's experience by just choosing different colors to put in different places. And that's sort of like what you see, like a bunch of these avant-garde artists doing, like, we could really do some interesting things if we really think about it. Okay, I think I'm getting pretty close. Oh, the nose. Let's zoom in on that. We'll tackle the face of the horse here last. I'm probably. Maybe just a bit more there. Okay, I think that's good. Let's just touch that up. We could do a tiny bit of outlining with the paintbrush. Let's just see though. Maybe, I wonder, could we take this same color and do just a bit darkening here? I think, well, I'm doing it, so I think we obviously can, because, you know, this is basically a really, really dark blue, and we've got this dark blue, we've got in this green, we've got blue and green, obviously. Maybe can we put a bit of it in here too? Maybe can we put a bit of it in here too? We're just lightly dry brushing. Yeah, well, we just did it, right? Okay, let's just just before we wrap up here, let's take a look at the horse's face. Okay. You can really see these very quick brush strokes like we've been doing throughout today's episode, right? So, I love that flared nostril. Let's see if we can get a bit of that. So I had, you know, a shape on there, this kind of square shape, and now I'm kind of converting it into this spiral shape, which means I'm going to take a little bit of white and paint that in there shortly. Bit of my blue and just a little bit of I mean, that's not bad as it is, but let's just clean this brush right off. Let's take a bit of white. Where are we? We don't want just pure white. Ah, I got a bit of red on there. I'm gonna do that again. Clean that brush. Okay, let's try that again. Take our white. I want a tiny bit of that blue because I don't want it to be pure white, because it might be a little bit too intense, because we don't really have any other white just yet. And again, I'm trying to do a little bit of this dry brush on top of that there. And then taking the same color. Going to build up a little bit of some of this white in here. Okay, and now I'm going to take just a little bit of actual white paint that in a few places. And I didn't clean my brush, so that white is going to be already pretty blue the minute I start painting with it. I want dark. Yeah, let's. I kind of opened a bit of Pandora's box here by putting that white in here. So now I've got to kind of go around a little bit and maybe do a bit of dry brush with some white. So I'm just getting a little bit of white, not a lot, because I want to dry brush with it. Like, we can see little areas where he's got a little bit of that white. So I'm pretty confident that this is something he did at some point in this painting. Let me just zoom out. Okay, maybe, do we need any more white elsewhere? I think there's a bit of white. Right here. Rag. I don't know. Am I done? Could be done. I did say that maybe I would take a bit of warm red and just do a tiny little bit of dry brushing. That, and then maybe do a little bit of the opposite. Take this darker color down here, dry brush just a tad. Oops, it's still pretty white. Oops. Gotta clean that brush off. Let's try that again. And I think just the last little thing I want to do. Well, I could put more white there, couldn't I? I think I want to just take my dark color. Just want to clean up this edge a little bit. That's good. I think I do need a little bit of... So this is kind of a baby blue there. I want to get that even more white. It probably looks pretty white on camera, but I'm just going to blow dry really quickly. Okay. This will be the final little thing here. So let's take some pure white. Just rub a bit off. And then we're going to come right here into the middle of the face. Oops, it looks like I need even more. And I think it's pretty... It's not a surprise that we have white right on the face, because that's probably where the central focus of attention is. You know, because that, again, we're talking about contrast, and we have a strong contrast. It's going to pull the eye towards that area. The stronger the contrast, the more attention it's going to get. You know, it's just like any other type of thing. You know, if you're in a very quiet, you know, if you're in the library and somebody starts yelling in the library, that's where your attention's going to go. Right? If you're in a dark room and somebody turns all the lights on, wow, that's going to get your attention. A strong contrast. You know, and you can't get much stronger of a contrast than white and a darker color next to it. Right? Because that's a very extreme value contrast. In fact, now that I see this, I see it's kind of also pretty... It's got a bit of white right here, too. I have to be... I always, like... Sometimes I get sucked into this final touching part of a painting, because I really enjoy this type of a thing. And like, I think right here, you know, he has sort of brightened a little bit of white back in here again to help create that contrast between the form of the horse and some of the background areas. In fact, I'm going to lighten this up down here as well. Okay, I think I should call that a painting. So, let's sign this. Donna says, this is going to be a very hard painting for me to do. I'm not very good at dry brushing. It always seems unfinished to me. I can understand for sure. Dry brush though is a great technique because artists use it all the time, and if you don't want to use the glazing method of really thin layers of paint, like we really didn't use any medium except I put a little bit of matte medium to make that kind of eggshell color at the beginning. It is really helpful. It does take a little bit of practice, though, for sure, because sometimes if you're dry brushing, you sometimes get those blobs of paint that somehow just leak out of the center. You think like, oh, this is a really dry brush, and then, oh, it's not dry at all. It's very wet. Huh, okay. So we're at that stage of the painting now, or the episode, where we're just going to take a second to take a look at them side by side and just talk about how things turned out. And so maybe beforehand, just as a quick reminder to like and subscribe, to hit the notification bell. There's a few things you can do, including taking a photograph of the painting you made, upload it to our private Facebook page. I would love to see what you created here today. Whether even if you made Franz Marc's painting, the other Franz Marc painting of the yellow cow, or something else entirely, because the goal is ultimately for you to be making the paintings that mean most to you, right? And so there's also other ways. If you want to make a small donation to the channel to help keep all the power on, because sometimes it turns off, that would be awesome. I'm so blessed to have so many wonderful people like yourselves who've supported the channel over the past few years. So that is awesome. Thank you, everyone, for your constant donations. Those make a big, big difference. So let's see these two side by side before we wrap up. Yeah, I got pretty close. You know, there's, again, little details. I could continue dry brushing and kind of dirtying things down a little bit here and there. Maybe this could even go darker. But we're pretty good. Pretty good. Maybe even a little more blue up here. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe let's just zoom in. You can see mine's not, you know, perfectly executed either. So if you're worried about feeling like it needs to be perfect, I think there's other things in the world to worry about that are of much graver concern. So thank you, everyone, for painting along with me once again today. On Thursday, we are going to be painting a Vincent van Gogh self-portrait that he did, one of the few ones that he did with a clean shaved face. So, and it's also one of the most expensive paintings ever sold. Over $100 million somebody plopped down for that one. So we'll take a look at that, and we're going to really explore Van Gogh's style. We did do an entire week on Van Gogh where we painted some of his most famous paintings. So if you're really excited about Van Gogh, there are, I think, probably 6 or 7 Van Gogh episodes that we've already done in the past. Okay, everybody, enjoy the rest of your evening, wherever you are on our beautiful planet Earth. Thank goodness I'm here where I can be safe, and my family is safe, and everyone here who's watching, I'm glad that we live in a country in countries that still are free. Good night, everybody. We'll talk to you again on Thursday.